on 23 October, and we're looking at a possible date for all the by-elections for 5 December. As you know, we've not been operational, so we need time for procurements and time for implementation of certain things. So there's a draft electoral roadmap which I will share with the chairperson for the use of those who would like to perhaps have access to it. So those are the vacancies. With regards to the filling in of PR vacancies, I'll talk about that at length, but just by way of report on our administration, the Commission has gazetted the names submitted by MDC-T as its nominees to fill in the PR vacancies in terms of Section 39 of the Electoral Act. And there are 15 PR vacancies. We have since received 10,340 objections whose validity is being checked in terms of the Electoral Act. I'll talk about that more at length, about what we do during the checking process, what we're looking at, and what aggrieved parties or interested parties can do or not do. We are due to publish the lifting of the suspension of by-elections sometime during this week or sometime over the weekend. We're working on the appropriate notices. I'd like to talk about money. That's one of the main reasons why I agreed to actually stand before you today, because I want to talk about money, and your parliamentarians. You're probably in a position to assist. ZEC was allocated 37.7 million for compensation of employees in 2020. As at 31 August 2020, we had spent 39.6 million. We've already spent 1.9 million, which was unbudgeted. So you probably know that in order to conduct the by-elections, we're going to have to submit a supplementary budget which we expect to be approved, because we could not have budgeted for or foreseen that there were going to be recalls that would require this many by-elections. The projection of salaries shows that the Commission will not be able to support September 2020 wage bill and the months thereafter to 31 December 2020. The projections are based on current salary levels with no provision for increments till year end. 2020 budget was affected by cushioning allowances, upward review of salaries from January 2020, and the COVID-19 allowances, as well as related expenses. All these upward reviews were not complemented by an upward review of salary budgets. In other words, Treasury hasn't given us any extra money despite the COVID challenge. In fact, just an interesting fact, our operational budget is something like 2.8 million for all our offices in all provinces. But during the lockdown, we were receiving 100,000 a month. So we were basically operating on a shoestring budget. We've written to Treasury and asked them for additional budgetary support of about 18.5 million. That's what we're going to need to conduct by-elections and to pay salaries. It is hoped that the request will get the necessary attention from Treasury to enable the Commission to see itself through to the year end. Okay, that's it. With regards to money. So I think, Chairman, with your permission, this is the current status of the administration of ZEC. And I'm going to allow members to put questions, because I think it's better to address issues that people are interested in hearing than just to blather on about uninteresting issues. These are the issues that are bedeviling us. Those who have questions with regards to the first part of the program, current status of our administration, Q&A. Who wants to know where the money went?
Honorable members, are we ready with questions, or should we let the esteemed judge go on, then we go into Q&A once and for all? Honorable Chair here, come to
Thank you very much, Honorable Kachiri. I just want to find out if you have got an idea about the amount of money you are looking for in your supplementary budget. Thank you.
All right, we've asked Treasury for 18.5 million. Yes, additional support. And this is to complement our COVID-19 policy, which I'll talk about at length. We're looking at things like if a voter goes into a polling station, is it fair to say to them, either bring your own ballpoint pen or use the one ballpoint pen that everybody else has touched? Or do we need to sanitize each ballpoint pen after somebody has voted? You know the issues with COVID. So there's quite a bit, and it's fairly involved. 18.5 million. I've talked about the number of by-elections that we're looking at, and we are actually anticipating that there could be quite a few more.
Thank you very much. Honorable Maitana, the question. Can you assist us with those sanitized tissues? So we can clean them up.
Put you sanitize after use.
Like I just say, thank you very much for the presentation you've given us so far. But like what you say, maybe there are some questions that we have that really concern us that we might want to ask. The first question I wanted to ask yesterday when we had a meeting that we had, that I didn't get quite an answer. The question was in terms of your policy. I understand there are some submissions that you're going to put, especially to the Minister of Justice. So the issue is on your policy in terms of gender equality. What is it that you would want to foster more, especially in line with the Constitution, concerning the candidates that need to be presented, especially concerning that we need to be adhering to the 50-50. As much as we have got the constitutional amendment which is in place, but I believe that also is that it would be good if you're going to be having that policy within yourselves to make sure that at least we adhere to gender equality and also gender inclusiveness when it comes to election candidates. That's the first question. The second question that I also wanted to ask was, if you look at our current population, we are looking at about, last time I'm sure it was about 5 million voters, and then indeed we know that the numbers have increased. And maybe let us talk of a 6.5 million, just assuming. We understand that we've got 210 constituencies. But if we're going to divide that number with the numbers that we're looking at, whereby you're saying each constituency should be having 21,000 or even 27,000, so the figures are quite distorted. If you look at 6.5 million, for example, and you divide by 200%, you will get 30,000. So automatically that means already that the constituencies will actually be more. Do you have any plan for increasing constituencies, or what plan do you have, considering that already we have already surpassed in each constituency? So what it means then is that we're going to be having chances of inadequate resources being allocated to each constituency. So do you have any plans in place, or maybe you still insist on saying that since it is constitutional, whereby there are 210 constituencies, or maybe there is now a need, which I understand very well, that there will be a need for us to increase those 210 constituencies. I think those are just my concerns. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for those thought-provoking questions. The first one with regards to implementing gender parity, basically. We did have a learning visit with some members of parliament where we went to study the South African system and how they've been able to whip political parties into giving effect to gender parity. And what we found was that there's a difference between their electoral act and our electoral act, and we need to give our electoral act some teeth. So basically our electoral act doesn't have real-time penalties that can force electoral parties to comply even to the Constitution. You know that our electoral act penalizes anything that is deemed an electoral malpractice is penalized. And then the route that is given in the act is that what you do, you're supposed to go to the police station, make a report, get them to open a docket, then the matter goes to court. And in theory, we're told that cases involving the election are fast-tracked. But in reality, you find that the election comes, it goes, the person is going to remand, the docket is not complete. So we made recommendations to the minister, and remember there's an interministerial committee which is looking at reforms, not only electoral reforms, but political ones as well. We made recommendations to them to amend the Electoral Act, to give it some teeth, which is more in line with the South African system. So let me explain what happens in South Africa, because they have a proportional representation system. So what they do is they say to political parties, this party list, which you have submitted, doesn't have 50% of women. Therefore, amend your party list, or we're going to remove so many votes from your proportional representation entitlement. I don't know whether I've explained that very well. They penalize them. So they say, you either give us a list which complies with gender parity in terms of the Constitution, or we're going to take away 30,000 votes. So it's up to the political party to then say, all right, we'll withdraw that one and we give you one which has more women. So we don't have that in our electoral act, because our electoral system is part proportional representation and then part first past the post. We have come up with a model whereby if there is political will, the Electoral Act can be amended in such a way that it would be better to comply with provisions with regard to gender parity than not comply. I won't go into the details. I'm sure if you sat down and had a look at what is happening in South Africa, we've proposed something similar in our recommendations to the executive. To answer your second question, population and votes. All right, we want to talk about delimitation. Right, we all know that delimitation is conducted after every 10 years. And the average number of voters per constituency is calculated by dividing the country's total registered voter population by 210. We were just talking about how lawyers don't like doing sums. So you divide 210 into however many number of registered voters, right? So we take for an example, as at 1 August 2019, we had a total registered voter population of 5,676,522. And there are 210 constituencies. So those of you who are good with math can quickly divide 210 into 5,676,522. And it follows that the average voter population per constituency will give us 27,032, if my mathematics is correct. I have had breakfast, so my brain should be working. Okay, so 27,032 registered voters. The law then says that when we delimit, the average is 27,032, but we are allowed to add 10% of that or subtract 10% of that. So it's 27,032, and then plus or minus 20% of that figure. We take plus or minus 20%. Because that gives us leeway to take factors into consideration such as rivers, mountains, barriers, social amenities, and to keep areas of common interest such as schools, business centers, health centers. So what we don't want to do, or what we are not allowed to do, is when we delimit, is to have a constituency with 10 schools and then a constituency with no school at all. So that plus or minus 20% allows us to then say, let's extend this boundary by 10% so that we at least give this one 2 schools. So those are the sorts of things that we take into consideration. So then, the upper limit would give us an average of 32,438, and the lower limit would be 21,625, if we use those figures that I've given you. So basically, it's a mathematical exercise, but it's not only mathematical, it takes other things into consideration. I think we take into consideration when we draw the boundary, we are supposed to maybe not divide Mataranika and these people in half, but we can add 10% to make sure that that village stays together as a village. So that's the reason. So basically, just to give you some interesting figures, excess figures above the upper limit will be distributed to the surrounding constituencies in the delimitation process. Sakayo constituency yako kana ine more than 32,000. Vanhu vakweva watakutocheka constituency tovaendesa to the next constituency. So that iwewe unoramba une 32,000 because that's the upper limit which is permissible. So, to answer your question, we are not creating more constituencies because the number of constituencies is entrenched in the Constitution. If the Constitution changes, we can also change the formula because it makes sense. This is scientific. So, we as ZEC have no plan to add on to the constituencies because it will add on to our administrative work, which is, as you know, a headache. We have no immediate plans. However, if the Constitution is changed, we will follow the dictates of the Constitution. I've tried to give you a rough idea of how delimitation works. So basically what you need to do is to make sure that you're doing a voter registration drive so that you at least meet the minimum year 21,625. If you don't, you stand the danger that your constituents will be collapsed into the next one because there was no minimum figure. This is the reality. So basically, as at 1 August 2019, there were 45 constituencies which had the above average of 32,438 registered voters. 45 constituencies. Sakatatakana only above average. But no one to the next constituency. No one is allowed to have a constituency that has more than 32,438 registered voters. And remember, it's not about the geographical, it's not about the shape of your constituency. It's about the number of registered voters. I think there's a constituency in, I don't know if it's in the north or south, which is in a conservancy. It's huge, but there's probably 10 registered voters in Mapaka Rangers. So it's not about the size, it's about the number of registered voters. So can I have, just to make this interesting so we don't fall asleep, let's have 3 female members and 2 female members tell me what their constituencies are so that I can tell them how many registered voters they had as at 1 August 2019. Hannah? 3 female and 3 men. Gender parity. Just hold on, because I have to go through this list. What did you say? Hold on. Can I just hear one so that I can look?
No, just some order. Honorable Nancy, you get a chance. Honorable Nancy, followed by Honorable Joe, Honorable Mawetera, Honorable Shinyangani. Who else? Honorable Sanyate, in that order.
All right. Name of your constituency?
Makoni North.
Makoni North. Just bear with me while I go through my list. What's the next one?
Berengwa, is it Berengwa? Honorable Joe?
Berengwa North.
Berengwa North had 19,105 registered voters.
Got some work to do there.
And it means you're not meeting the minimum as at August, therefore you're in danger.
Honorable Mawetera?
Makoni North.
Second.
Berengwa North is about the
You are going one.
We need to do some work.
Okay, maybe I'm just going to pick some at random because this is a long list. We don't want to be here all day. So,
Maybe you want to do as a suggestion, if you allow me, honorable members. If we could pick maybe one constituency to follow.
it's difficult to tell from my list, so I'll just pick at random. Lubeve had 34,747. Budiriro had 50,289. This is as at 1 August 2019. Bindura South had 34,635. Binga North had 33,648. Bulawayo East had 21,624. Jimba West had 21,134. Lupani East had 20,482. Insiza South had 14,643. Matobo South had 15,258. So you get the idea, honorable members, isn't it? That this is how delimitation works. So because it's a scientific exercise, what we do is we do delimitation on paper, and we then gazette the proposed new boundaries. And in terms of the new constitution, any aggrieved member can actually object to the proposed boundary to say, you're allowed to object. There's a certain time period to object. We take the objections into consideration. The preliminary delimitation report is tabled before Parliament. There's an opportunity to object. Then we publish the final delimitation report, which should be in place at least 6 months before the election is proclaimed. If we don't publish a final report, publish it 3 months before the election, we use old boundaries. So in order to use the new boundaries, we must table the final report before Parliament. I think that gave me an opportunity to talk about delimitation. Thank you, Honourable, for asking the question. I don't know if there are any questions, or we can move to the next session and then everyone can just ask anything at random.
That's fine. Are there any further questions regards? Just last one and then we move to the next session.
Thank you very much. I had a question she's answered. I also wanted to find out that since now we are using the US dollars, is your budget on bond or US dollars 18.9 million?
It's the RTGS equivalent of 18.9 million US dollars. Thank you for allowing me to clarify. This is what we say is the RTGS equivalent of that sum in US dollars.
Sounds a bit technical, but I think I get the gist of it. That was a quick question. Can I have another quick one? Whilst she's preparing for the next session. Honorable Masambo, General Authority.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Honorable Masambo? No, he's just passing the phone. That's Honorable David for you.
I just want to find out for how long can a vacant post go on without being filled in, let's say in local authority or national assembly?
Okay, I think that's what we're going to talk about in detail in the next session, if I'm not mistaken. Do you want to hold on to your question until I lay a few basic things according to my understanding, and then we can I ask you to hold on to your question or not? Right.
All right. Thank you, honorable members, for your questions. Shall we allow the judge to continue to the next session, where she's going to talk about suspension of electoral activities and the status of the COVID-19 policy on electoral activities. Over to you, Honorable Judge.
Thank you very much, Honorable. Honorable Kashi, my brother. Thank you. Right, I'll start with our COVID-19 policy because it's easier. Okay. When the COVID-19 regulations were put in place, we sat down as a commission and we studied them. And what we understood was that, firstly, the regulations had been put in place using executive power. What the regulations purported to do was to suspend certain rights because of the public emergency, which was an act of God, which was a global pandemic. Honorable members, when I said in 2018 that only an earthquake can stop the election, I was misunderstood. What I meant was, no right is absolute. Rights are subject to limitations in a democratic society. So, the right to freedom of assembly, the right to freedom of association, your right to gather and say, Pambelina Chigumba or Pasna Chigumba, that's subject to limitations. All right? So what the government did was, there's a global pandemic. Garai Mumba, that was a limitation of the right to freedom of movement. Right? Faraima Bawa, Faraima, you can't travel here, that was the restriction. So basically, we were of the view that because the regulations emanated from executive powers, which emanate from the Constitution, there was no need for us to seek a court order to stop by-elections or electoral activities because the Electoral Act is subordinate to executive powers. We did consult widely. If you remember, at the same time, the courts also closed their doors, and the courts did not go to the Judicial Services Act to say, oh, dear judge, please give us a court order to say we should close our doors and then open them when government says we can. The courts simply closed their doors because they recognized that the regulations were put in place using superior legislation, using the Constitution, and using executive power. We then decided to inform our stakeholders that we were closing our doors, we were suspending activities because of the regulations which were put in place using emergency presidential power. There's a mistaken belief that we ought to have gone to court to get an order to suspend by-elections. We, after reading the regulations, were of the view that there was no need to invoke subsidiary or inferior legislation, which is the Electoral Act, where the regulations have been crafted using executive power, because we could not challenge the executive power. For instance, we couldn't say, oh, yes, we need to start about by-election. We couldn't, because the policy that was put in place, it came from executive power. So basically, I'm determined to explain things without quoting sections and subsections, because that's a bit boring. So basically, that's why we then decided to suspend by-elections. If you remember, at the time when we notified the public that we had suspended by-elections, and we had a lengthy debate about whether or not we should let that one go ahead because we had already gazetted it. But then the question was, the people who want to be elected. Because there's now a policy in place that says you can't gather more than 50. Because there was restriction of movement. Remember, there was no transport. We then decided, PPE, ballot paper. Ballot paper. Can we be sued by somebody who says that in a polling station because of that? Can we be sued by somebody who says, so those were the things we looked at, and we decided that the regulations that were put in place by government, they were clear enough to allow us to suspend all electoral activities because the law recognizes the defense of necessity, the law recognizes something called vis major, which is an act of God, which takes me back to 2018. Our Electoral Act, as it is currently couched, you all know the Electoral Act has not been aligned to the Constitution. Our Electoral Act is couched in a way that cannot declare election. It's a runaway train, and the only thing that can put brakes on that train is a court order. So when I said only an earthquake can stop the election, I meant only an act of God. Never mind the earthquake in 2018, because people were talking about why don't you postpone the election? And I said, no. Can election date not proclaim it? I don't have to stop election. I need a court order. That's what the Electoral Act says. So this is the background to what happened in terms of the recall. And we, as the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, were part of something called the SADC Electoral Commissions Forum. So SADC Electoral Commissions Forum decided that they wanted to craft guidelines to SADC electoral management bodies to say, how do we conduct COVID? How do we conduct my elections taking COVID into consideration? We were in consultation with SADC because we are a member, although we haven't paid fees in years. But and every time we go there, we are embarrassed. Zimbabwe, when are you going to pay up? But anyway, we then also decided it was good policy because the difficulty is there's nothing in the Electoral Act which allows us to conduct an election with COVID-19 compliant methods in place. So if somebody came to the door of an electoral tent, a polling station, on the temperature, what do you do? You've got to have something in place that my presiding officer, they will apply across the board chili uniform. So this is where the idea came up, that we need to come up with a policy guide around the polling station, and which would also not only protect our stakeholders, the voters, protect one another. For instance, have you thought about polling agents? To a polling station too big, check out polling agent and about bench. How do they socially distance what a bench from? It can seem like Ajnabasa Kauri, but for me, if I'm supervising 11,800 polling stations, I need a policy to guide people so that I take the uniform. Most of what I have, so we wanted to have something. And I think what I need to tell you is this. We crafted the policy, we asked for contributions, we finalized it, and then because of budgetary constraints, our policy is still with the printers. It will be printed, it's going to be printed and it's going to be distributed to all stakeholders, including yourself, very soon. Provided my treasury to okay? It's at the printers. We have ordered sufficient numbers to distribute to all stakeholders. We are waiting for the requisite budgetary support. So basically, if you look at the policy, it talks about how the Commission commits itself to providing thermometers at all electoral centers, sanitizers, hand washing buckets with running water, masks for electoral staff, and for voters where necessary, because the idea was polling station, do you necessarily turn away Gogo, or do you have to have maybe an emergency mask system where so we decided that we would provide a certain number of masks in each polling station for deserving. I don't know what deserving is. It will have to be according to discretion. No, we are handicapped. We can't turn them away. So those are the sorts of things that we were working on. And then we also worked out in terms of that policy how we were going to deal with the process of filling in proportional representation vacancies. In the event of a vacancy occurring among the party list members of the Senate or of the National Assembly, the President of the Senate or the Speaker, as the case may be, shall notify the Commission of the vacancy in writing as soon as possible after he or she becomes aware of it. The Commission shall, without delay, notify the public of the vacancy by notice in the Gazette. I'll stop there so that we can talk about that. So I'm not going to speak for Parliament, because I have no mandate to speak for Parliament. So I'll go to B, where the Commission shall, without delay, notify the public of the vacancy by notice in the Gazette. The first thing to note is that our interpretation of that word shall is that it's peremptory. and that the drafters of the legislation did not give us discretion to say, oh, Honorable Kashiri, let's go and call as you see fair. Chaudzwa uzwaita vakatimboabvunza here kuparliament vacho kuti sei mati imini Honorable Kashiri ngavati, we don't have a mandate to review notification that comes from Parliament. Ndosaka kuine separation of power. This was not as I act here with the Electoral Act, and the Act is saying we shall. It's not saying we may. If we may, we would then understand that we have leeway or discretion to say, because of these circumstances, because kunema court case asata finalized, because we don't like the person who did the recall, we have no discretion whatsoever. If you are aggrieved, go to court and get an appropriate order. Now the question then becomes, what happens in the interim while we're waiting for the court to pronounce itself? We proceed. When you go to court, and this is tantamount to giving legal advice, when you go to court to get the process stopped, get that court to give you an order to say, in the meanwhile, can ZEC stop what they are doing pending determination of my judgment? We've had secret phone calls saying, Judge, are you willing to vomit? No! It's not about me. It's not about who's willing. It's about get a two-pronged order. An order that says, I've challenged XYZ. While I'm waiting for pronouncement on XYZ, can the Electoral Commission please be ordered to stop, because we have no power, we have no discretion to stop our own processes. I want that to be understood. This is our interpretation. I know there's a different school of thought which says, kunema conflicting court order. Kunema appeal akaenda to Supreme Court. Imagine a situation where there are recalls. Then ZEC says, no, these recalls are wrong. This is why we're not going to do anything about it. And then we don't gazette the vacancies. And the matter takes 5 years for the Supreme Court to pronounce itself. It's just we really don't like what's happening in Parliament, over tea. Let's just, the Supreme Court then takes 5 years to give a final ruling, which has already happened in a certain matter, where the court took time to pronounce itself. Will we have fulfilled our mandate as ZEC by folding our hands and not doing anything when the Act says we shall, without delay? Tikamira, because Kuninyaenda Supreme Court, that's delay. Tikamira, because we don't like Honorable Kashiri, that's delay. Tikamira, because in our opinion, A is wrong and B is right and C is in between, that's delay. And input without delay, we can be sued for dereliction of duty, and in fact it will be unconstitutional. I think I'll end there, then allow people to put questions to me with regards to the recalls. With regards to the COVID policy, I think that if policy not to police station, I think we've also discussed we're going to put notice enter at your own risk to polling station. Do you want to vote? We're going to do everything possible within our power. We're going to do everything possible within our power to temperature test, sanitize, provide things to the best of our ability. We might be entering a new normal where we're going to polling station so that we don't have to touch a pen, yet snuggle not yet sanitizer and cannot have enough sanitizer. I think that's it with regards to the COVID policy, and also that's what I wanted to say with regards to the recalls. I know that if I give an opportunity for Q&A, more things will become clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's have an energetic round of applause, please. Thank you, honorable members. Let's quickly move into our question and answer session. If possible, let's have 2 or 3 questions at a go, then she can respond, because we are ahead behind time. Any questions? Any questions, honorable members? Honorable Mr.
My question goes back to, I think, the earlier conversation that we had, which was a general conversation. I think as a committee, it would be interesting to hear from you the issues around the electoral reforms that the chairperson raised. What would you suggest as a framework that we could use to get yourselves and us around the table on the issues that we really think we need to deal with before we get to the 2023 election? Because I think for us as Justice Committee, we want to work with yourselves and see where we go. Your point that you raised around the South African model is a very interesting one around the gender issues. And I think those are the things that we would want to, work together and say, what do you see ourselves doing which would work for you? I'll just give you an example around that gender issue. One of the problems that we are having when we're engaging with political parties is political parties are saying, please don't legislate for us. And what I'm hearing from you is there is a possibility of actually legislating for political parties, but I think there are many more. So at what point, how do we organize this framework where we know where you are and what your thoughts are, and you know where we are also coming from, to be able together to push the executive in a particular direction? I hear you say there are certain proposals that you gave to the executive, I guess to the interministerial committee of the executive. How do we engage with that process with you? So that you are not just going to the executive, but you are also coming to ourselves. Then second is the issue to do with the budget. I hear you say, your parliamentarians, yes, we can be very effective around lobbying for your resources. But it would be good if we were to have those with us to actually have the budget, so that at the point that we are engaging with the Minister of Finance or we're engaging with Justice, we are able to say for these by-elections to actually take place, A, B, C, D has to take place. Thirdly, honorable question, if you allow me, the objections that you were talking about, do you deal with them during the process with which you have your 14 days of gazetting? Or what happens? So if there are 10,000, do you extend the period with which you are going to look at the objections? Because I thought that your gazetting was for the 14 days. So if you are going to go through the 10,000, do you extend the 14 days? Or at the 14 days, at the end of the 14 days, that's where you would have looked at the 10,000 or so objections. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, my honorable namesake. Your first question, with regards to electoral reforms and how we can have synergies between your committee and ZEC, that's very easy. On invitation. You invited me today, I came. It's a show of good faith. In terms of the mandate of ZEC, if you look at the Constitution even and the Electoral Act, it's very much within our mandate to engage with stakeholders. You are a vital stakeholder. Upon invitation, if I can avail myself, I will. If not me, one of my commissioners or a member of Secretariat. Anything that you feel you'd like to be addressed, you'd like to discuss, you'd like to talk about, on invitation, it's that simple. And with regards to reforms, electoral reforms, I think the thing that you could do for the Commission now is to align the Electoral Act to the Constitution, without even talking about what observers said or what people were not happy with. Because a lot of the things, a lot of the issues that are being termed issues that need reform are issues that emanate from inconsistencies that now exist between certain sections of the Electoral Act and what the Constitution says. As you know, the Constitution is a new Constitution. Some of the issues that bedeviled us in 2018 emanated from the fact that the Electoral Act, although it was amended in 2018, it was not aligned to the Constitution. So if you could fast track the amendment or the alignment of the Act to the Constitution, as Parliament, as ZEC, we would be very grateful for that. Some of the issues that we've made recommendations in respect of include giving ZEC the power to improve the code of conduct, to give it some teeth. Remember, our electoral code of conduct, the one that you attach to your nomination papers, the one that you sign, it's toothless, honorable members, if you want to be honest with yourself. It doesn't give ZEC power to sanction you in real time. So for instance, let's talk about hate speech. Honorable Mr. where you go, you have a rally, which amounts to hate speech. We as a commission are lobbying to have some sort of power to impose a sanction on you that very day, instead of telling you to go to the police to make a report, instead of waiting for the criminal process, which we know takes time, instead of waiting for that process, whose sanctions are ineffective. Because if after 2 years you are tried and then you are fined $20 US, that's nothing. So again, like I said, we did have a working visit in South Africa where we found immediately that day the commission monitors, it writes a letter to your party to say, dear party ABC, your honorable member so-and-so was heard saying XYZ, please come for a short hearing. They do short hearings where the person who is accusing you of hate speech says, I was there, I heard you say XYZ, and then the commission says, well, we've removed 20,000 votes from your PR list. That's the sanction, basically. Because when you're campaigning for votes, isn't it? So if the commission then takes away your votes, in South Africa it's been found to work. It forces compliance, and what it also does is, what we found is, members from your own party will then actually give you a ring and say, Honorable, do you understand? So it's a sort of self-policing mechanism. Even your party will not be happy with you if you cost them votes by, I just chose hate speech, but they have a list of what they call electoral malpractices. And then any one of them, a person reports to the commission in writing, the commission calls you in, they make a determination, then they dock your votes. So it's been found to work. If we recommended that we be given similar power, but it involves tweaking the Electoral Act. But those recommendations have been tabled. I just gave that one as an example. The other thing that we're quite keen, honorable members, to have addressed is the question of diaspora vote or no diaspora vote, because it's quite topical. What we have proposed is something along the lines of just extending the postal vote to people in the diaspora. But the thing is, you have to come and register to vote. Then what you do is you apply from Belgium to say, I would like to exercise the postal vote. On polling day, you go to your embassy, your ballot paper will have been sent to the embassy through the diplomatic bag. You vote and your ballot paper is then put in the diplomatic bag. That's a way of doing it, perhaps, if there's political will, in time for 2023, without talking about massive capital outlay. You understand what I'm saying? Tributary census, tributary delimitation. It's not likely that we'll have money, some officers in 183 countries to register people to vote. So we're looking at extending the postal vote. It's a way of people in the diaspora for voting. And the question that I was asked was, proof of residency. And our proposal is, if you'd like to vote from the diaspora, how long you register? It's not what does that certificate, police station where you were born. It's easiest. Because then we don't have to consider whether you're in Vienna or you are in London. This is what we're looking at. Is it realistic to say, ZEC China is to 180 countries, you know, register diaspora vote in 2023, still in 2020. This year we census, next year we delimitation. We're looking at treasury, we're looking at COVID, we're looking at how it has affected our economy. Is it realistic? Do we have the money? If not, is it feasible, like I've said, to extend the postal vote, and it might be feasible. So those are just examples, but really what I would like is Act into the Constitution. It will go a long way towards addressing some of the issues. With regards to budget, again, like I said, write us a letter, just say, we're engaging with Ministry of Finance, please send us your proposed budget so that we can lobby on your behalf. We'd be happy to do that. Okay? How do we deal with objections? My objection I'm told you are now within 14 days honorable because you can't stop a process unless a court gives you an order to stop. So basically, these 10,000 and some odd objections, they've come from different provinces. And what we've done is we have decided to divide my objections in by the number of offices that we have. So that it's not just one person sitting down going through 10,000 and some odd applications, it's everybody in all our offices. So we've sent them to all the provinces and we're going to get reports. Now basically what I need you to understand, honorable members, with regards to objections. The Act says we look at objections to decide, just look at the Act because the wording is very interesting, to decide which objections are valid. I think that's the wording. So the question then becomes, Chikun's is valid, it's I think section 39(7), for those of you who are interested in sections. It starts from 5. So we look at, are there any valid grounds for objecting to the candidate? Now, valid grounds are what are valid grounds in terms of the Act. So we look at, in order to be a councillor, what are the basic minimum requirements from the Act? So what you want to 18 years and it. So the objection should be, this person cannot fill that post because they're not 18 years old. That's a valid ground. You understand? If you have a ground which we don't consider valid because we don't have the mandate to adjudicate on that ground, it's not valid grounds for those objections for purposes of section 39. Do you understand? It's a valid ground for going to court to challenge the process. It's not a valid ground for ZEC to make a judgment on the merits, for ZEC to make a value judgment to say, we are putting in the manyane tsuro. Do you understand what I'm saying? We don't have power to, that's not a valid ground for objection. What is valid for objection in terms of the Act is this person qualified as a candidate in terms of the Act? So I think that's about nomination here, no more valid grounds. And then the second thing that I want honorable members to understand is, the Act says, if we find that there are valid grounds for objecting to my candidature, in any removal, the solution there would go back to that political party which is directly parties. The solution is not to say some other random person can then come into the process. So, people keep objecting, and the objections keep on being valid, people keep objecting. We know about it. Okay? All right, I think let's give others a chance to ask questions. Honorable, I hope you're answered.
Yes, I understand.
Any further questions? Any further questions, honorable members? Honorable Slide.
Another question. Commissioner, COVID-19 yauya nemitemo yakasiyana-siyana ichitarusa munhu asina facility yebooking akumusha like vanamadhuri kuti akumusha ground mataura kuti muchaisa mitemo yekuti zvichafambiswa sei paine election ende ndichitasa chirwere checovid-19 totarisa futi zvakare election kuti election itime inongofadza munhu wese nekuti ndiyo time yavanosarudza mutungamiriri wavanoda, ndiyo time yavanosarudza vavanoda kuti vavatungamiriri kuground vanenge vari. So everyone is excited to tell you. But I was just wondering as you were explaining it, to say, as we speak, COVID-19 mitemo yacho iripo zvikuitika zvacho zvikukonfyuza vanhu kuground. Pane time yekuti unonzwa vachiti tazomhanyiswa nemapurisa, tazomhanyiswa nemasoja, tazobvunzwa tsamba. In such a way that it's said, I will call it said, because it's not order. Now you say commission yaita policies yaita mtemo wayo executive ine power yekuti ite mtemo yayo. Uri kuzoenda here kuvanhu kuti unotaura nevanhu munzwisisane nekuti mitemo iyoyo is not mitemo yekuti ishande kuoffice kwenyu kwezeki. Haizi mitemo ichashanda kuoffice kweexecutive, mitemo ichaaffecta vanhu. Now what effort are you putting in place to make sure kuti gogo vangu madhure vari kucholocho vazonzwisisa? What effort are you putting in place to make sure kuti gogo vangu vachakwanisa kusumuka kunosarudza mutungamiriri wavo? Because that's the only chance yavanenge vawana kuti vasarudze munhu vanoda kuti vavatungamiriri. Wavaexplainera mabvumirana here pamutemo apo nekuti mutemo kuti ushande. Togona kuti sezeki munoisa mutemo muona zuva radoka hapana kuuya kuzovhota nekuti mitemo iyoyo haisi kuti ifambirane nevanhu vari kubva kumusha. Saka muchaizvifambisa sei kuti tiwirirane nevaya vari kumusha vanzwisise, vafambe zvakanaka, vasamotaura zvinhu zvisiri izvo, vasadiscouragane. You know, I'm trying to say they shouldn't be discouraged. Nokunzwa kuti masoja ari kurova vanhu, mapurisa ari kumhanyisa vanhu, veki vari kutaura zvakati, executive vari kutaura zvakati. Mutemo unoita effective munyika, mutemo wabvumirwana nevanhu vachashandisirwa pamutemo iwoyo. Nokuti hazvibatsiri kuti ndiri kumasipanda ndoti inene ndichaisa mutemo wekuti ndichati because yatime election, ndakava kuti time election is everyone's time. It's everyone's time which people love the best because that's the only time when they can choose who they want them to be. So, are you going to go to the ground and explain to everyone and be satisfied before you start implementing mitemo yamataura kuti isusu sezvetakagara pasi kuisa mitemo kana kuti executive nemapowers kudai takatarisa chirwere checovid-19 already chirwere checovid-19 chakaunza kushushikana chanetsa vanhu vari kutsambura because zvimutemo zvecovid-19 zvakaita. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Smanda. Commissioner Judge, just to maybe add on what Honorable Silvester has contributed, to say how much have we conscientized the electorate, especially looking at accessibility in rural areas. They're ready for elections in those kind of areas.
Right. Thank you very much, Honorable Smanda, for that very passionate contribution. I can see that it's coming from the bottom of your heart. Now, the first thing that I said was, COVID-19 policy. It's a policy. Mutemu. Hausi enforceable. Atina masimba yeku enforcer. Taedza kutsanangura kuti policy takaigadzirira kuitira ease of administration. Police station not anenge akawanda kugaida polling agents, kugaida presiding officer nekugaida voters. It's for guidance. So for instance, we are hoping that we will be able to disseminate the policy well in advance of 5 December. So we are proposing that date to give us an opportunity to come provinces using our multi-party liaison committees. There's also talk about budgetary support toisa policy in vernacular languages so that I understand what you're saying, I hear what you're saying, and we will make best efforts. Pataka policy, we did invite stakeholders to participate in contributions and we incorporated them in the policy. But just to put your mind at ease, Honorable Son, our policy is nothing new. Zvakafanana nezvamuri kuita pamuri kupinda musupermarket kuti unongotorwa template wotarisa kuti une mask here. Kana wapinda mukati unobvunzwa unoda kushandisa peni yedu here kana kuwauya neyako. Kana tiine budgetary support, we are hoping we'll be able to have sanitizer yekusanitizer mapena. Ballot paper uri kuda kukuhara kadaro here kana kuda kuti risanitize wakatarisa. It's a policy. And vanenge vari mumapolling station tinovatraina mapresiding officer vanoshandisa discretion yavo yekuti vanoonawo kuti gogwava vane zvavakaita izvi hatingambovati dzokerai kumba mozodzoka masikati kana kuti regai kuvhuta regai tichigogo tivape yedu masi tambotite tine mabhox mashoma shoma mamasi depending on mari yabva kutraining. So yes, we'll certainly make an effort. We are going to use multi-party liaison committees. Pachaitwa by-election a5 December, it's actually a test drive for us. Kuti tiri kukwanisa here kuita akunzi COVID-19 compliant elections. So in this SATA, COVID compliant elections tiri kukwanisa here. Tiri kutozvitestawo administration yedu nekuti tiri kuzviita kutanga. Saka zvinhu zvizhinji, honorable, ndiri munhu ndinowanzoda hangu kutaura chokwadi. Tikapuwa mari netreasury, tinomwaya vanhu muground vanoconcentrisa vanhu. Kana tisina mari, tinoisa vatinokwanisa nemari yatinenge tapinda. Ndochokwadi handiti? Hatitaura nechokwadi. Kana zvatikutaura zveCovid policy yacho hausi mutemo, hakuna munhu anosungwa for violating COVID policy. Tichakurudzirana, kuencourageana, nokuti kana tikazara COVID yacho tese tinongofa, handiti? Saka tinenge tichikurudzirana. Asi hatitaure kuti mbuya vati ndatadza kuvhuta nekuti ZEC yati COVID policy, hazvisiri izvo. This is operational, it's administrative, kuti tese tibatsirane kuti tisazorwara kana tabva kuvhuta. Handizive kuti mapindurika here. Honorable Son.
Any further questions, honorable members? As you can see, I think we've swiftly moved into the last section of our session, where we were discussing how best the portfolio committee can assist ZEC. I think we've swiftly moved into that. Are there any further contributions?
I just want to ask.
ZEC, I see a hand up there.
There's honorable.
Yeah?
There's honorable.
Honorable Masango.
Honorable Shibutena.
Oh, Honorable Shibutena, I didn't see your hands. I'm sorry about that. Thank you.
I just wanted to know what is the period between census and the delimitation exercise? The period between after census, how long does it take for us to do the delimitation?
Thank you for that question, Honorable. Delimitation kana yakuitwa panotoitwa proclamation. Yakafanana proclamation inoitwa kana takuenda kuelection. We hereby proclaim that the delimitation exercise will hereby start on date rakati. So how long it will take after census? I'm told that the amendment which has gone through your house to the Census Act has stipulated that the final census report be tabled before Parliament by August 2021. Saka final census report here, because it informs some of the processes that nature, the scientific processes that we use the data that comes from that census report to feed into delimitation. I know delimitation will be proclaimed kana treasury yataura kuti vane budgetary support for the delimitation process. Delimitation to a certain extent is the duplication of census, because we send officers on the ground to map polling station boundaries. So vanongoita sezvinoita census vachifamba kumatunhu kwenyu kumaconstituency kwenyu ikoko mukazwa kuti vanhu vedelimitation vauya, make sure you're on the ground because ndokwavanenge vachitarisa the geographical settings. But we are to a certain extent informed by what's in the census. Census inotudza kuti mune vanhu vangani, vechikuru vangani, vadiki vangani, vacheche vangani, zvikoro zvingani, migodhi mingani, so that when we do our boundaries, we take those issues into consideration. So to answer your question directly, after August 2021, delimitation will be proclaimed kana treasury yabatanidza mari yekusapota delimitation. I don't expect them to take more than 3 months after census report yabuda because they are aware of the fact that we need to take only 12 months to do delimitation so that my final boundaries are in place before proclamation year 2023.
Thank you so much. I just need clarity. When are you resuming all election activities?
When are we resuming all electoral activities? The Commission resolved in its meeting last month that we should have resumed on the 1st of September. Because, as you know, my office is so we are waiting for the notification to our stakeholders, which will be published in the weekend newspapers. This weekend, paper weekend, will publish to you that we've now opened. But in terms of the roadmap, area T9, as I've said, we are starting activities with a view to conducting all of the outstanding by-elections on a possible date of 5 December. Because it is our intention to table our report to Parliament outstanding by-election appear before the end of the year. So 5 December is our possible date. We will release a roadmap on activities that are happening.
Honorable Joe.
Thank you, Honorable Kashir. Honorable Justice Chair, can I please, the report check below parliamentary census, are you able to do a blitz for voters registration RG to register like my IDs? That is after August 2021.
All right. Now that we have opened and are going to be operating at full capacity, per RTGS equivalent of 18.5 million and we've asked Treasury to pay man. We are also in consultation with the RG. As you know, Mabulitano Shanda kana tichinge tichishanda nayo RG kuti vasina mabirth certificate, vasina zvitupa uzwa vatoreswa on the spot, vachibuda kuzvitupa vachipinda kuzoregister kuvota. We are planning on doing a blitz ndokunge tawana mari yacho. Kuita kwedu blitz zvinoenderana nekuti mari taiwana rini, asi we have submitted a claim or a request to Treasury to fund the blitz, because we are aware that yes, the limitation will to a large extent be determined by the number of registered voters. So you all need to drum up, especially from our constituencies, meter that minimum figure and maybe in the meanwhile, what MPs can do is when you do your clinics from a constituency, when you don't register voters. But we do intend to do a blitz, we planned for it. We just need budgetary support.
Thank you, Honorable Kashir. Since it's our approach our budget consultations, why can't you lobby through our committee to have a supplementary budget that is dedicated for the blitz in 2021 budget?
Honorable Missy, while she's jotting that down, then Honorable Missy,
I just wanted to have a follow-up. Justice raised the issue of alignment to the Constitution. And I was wondering whether you actually do have it in written form, the issues that you feel should be aligned to the Constitution, because that would be very useful for us as a committee, instead of us reinventing the wheel and looking for what those issues are. It would be useful to get that. But just one issue around voter registration. Have you considered
the issue that you raised around diaspora, but for local elections. When you get your birth certificate, you already, there is an indication you need to go back home. And it's not about C25 or it's Makaranga. Why can't you use that for purposes you put 18, you place them, which would mean I don't necessarily have to go for registration. Automatically, when I take 18, you know, postcode to where I'm born, like you are proposing for the issue of diaspora. So that if I want to change from that constituency, then that's when I come in and I do change the constituency. Because I'm not sure why we're spending so much money on doing voter registration for the start when we can link our birth certificate, our IDs to voter registration. What would be the problem other than the legal impediment?
Thank you very much for that interesting question, Honorable. Command voting. Well, mutemo wedu isusa umanikidze munhu kuvota. That's the basic underlying problem. You see, we've studied models from other countries. So in countries like Germany, like you're saying, automatically on turning 18, electronically move in the voters vote. Then for Germany, if you don't vote, you're actually penalized because it's mandatory to vote in Germany. Saka mukatanga kuti mandatory registration, makuisa mandatory voting with penalty. So you have to think as parliament, legislators, is that the way you want to go? Because currently, registration is voluntary. Actually, turning up on election day is also voluntary. The whole entire model. Automatic, it's now electronic, it's quite a DVR. It's simply a question of computer to computer. And it can be done, but, well, what do we say? Parliament willing. Dimima legislators, in place, is to implement. So the reason why we don't do that is because of the way that our Electoral Act is worded. With regards to alignment, we do have a bill, a draft bill, how would the Electoral Act look if it were aligned to the Constitution? So we can share some of the issues, but what I would like from this committee, if you can motivate the information sharing by a written letter so that we have V11s, and then because I can't just start sending you information without please let's do synergies and let's share particularly A, B, C, D, then we'll give you exactly what you need. We have done it, we have it in place, we have shared it with the committee who spearhead double forms, and we are hoping that they will accede to some of the issues, although I know the diaspora vote will be sticky, but we have to have some version of allowing people who are outside the country to vote, and this is the version that we've come up with, which we feel I suppose will put some money from Treasury, because the first thing you're just going to raise is money. But it will at least allow people to exercise their right to vote. It does involve people physically coming here to register to vote if they're not already on the BVR. Kanava City, they will have to register. And then they can write to us. And we've actually also recommended extending the postal vote. Polling station, they don't get to vote. We can extend the postal vote to them. There was talk about extending the postal vote to people in prison for the same reason, people in hospital for the same reason. Perhaps I have a disabled grandmother, that sort of thing. We've not looked at refugees because that's, I think, because we had not done due diligence on it, refugees. But certainly, if we extend the postal vote to say a person of this category can apply to vote, and what we would need is, when we exercise the postal vote, we exercise so that we receive their votes, 30 days before election day. In South Africa, they then bring all the postal votes to the command center. Then stakeholders and agents, they actually sit there while the postal votes are counted and allocated to polling stations. And it's done in those 30 days because to do it on election day is cumbersome. Because the name is verified. So it's being done, but political will, and I believe I'm facing a room full of politicians.
Honorable Mary,
Yes.
you got a question?
Yes, just a quick one for the judge. On ZEC reforms, the reforms around ZEC. Judge, you are aware that almost every time we have contested elections in this country, and one of the sticky issues has been around the reform of ZEC. Are you happy to speak to possibilities around the reform of your institution vis-a-vis the involvement of state security, particularly in view of the upcoming by-elections, given now the extended role of state security with respect to monitoring movement on the background of the outbreak of COVID-19. And also, you indicated earlier in your conversation with us that you do a lot of engagements with stakeholders as you carry that mandate. I am sure you have also come across requests from your publics around the issue of reforming the role of traditional leaders, as well as media reforms that extend to the consideration that ZBC is not living up to its expected position of a public broadcaster. These are quite huge issues, and apart from saying they are in the elephant in the room, they are the elephant in the room, I would equate them to an earthquake. In your own words, an earthquake can easily stop an election. I just want to pick your brains on these and other related matters, Judge, because pretty everyone in this country is tired of contested elections. But I like your proposal on the extension of the postal vote. I'm sure you will indulge me to go through that list of constituency registrations. Mine is one of those that are struggling. But I know if you and I went to Johannesburg, within an hour we'll be able to register more than 500,000 people from Makwekwe without stretching the imagination too far. Are there any possibilities of extending BVR registration to just the neighboring countries close by? Thank you, Judge.
Thank you very much, Honorable. I'll start with your last concern first. Kenya has implemented a provisional diaspora vote. They extended their diaspora vote to the region. Okay? So we don't have to be too ambitious. We don't have to talk about Vienna and London and Constantinople. We can just say, postal vote extended of Nevan region, which means South Africa, Kenya, in Africa. And then we look at Canada zone, we extend it further. Because as you're saying, if we implement a regional diaspora vote, it might be easier to go to our neighboring countries to register our brothers and sisters. They are our brothers and sisters. But again, as I said, I believe, honorable members, if you focus on aligning the Electoral Act to the Constitution, some of these things are not by that alignment. You understand? Because the inconsistency between the Act and the Constitution, or in 2018, but we know that the Constitution, it says this, but because the Act is not expressly giving us we couldn't do it, but we have time to do it. If you align the Act, state security, I'm a little bit constrained, not because it's not because but because when people say reform Yema state security agents, people mean different things by that. You understand? Kuna wangu wanoti atisikuda wanu wakambeni but masoja kana mapurisa secretariat here and murundu. And when people talk about reforming state security, some people mean that. But I just want to give you an example, Honorable Tindikudze. We conducted 2018 elections, Tina, acting CEO, who has a very clear security sector background. Tikati, Tirupita and I are acting because we didn't have time to interview a substantive CEO. We then, after the election, advertised the post. You'd be amazed at the lack of response, the lack of candidates. You'd think those people who felt very strongly that the CEO should not have a security sector background would send their sons and their relatives to compete for the post so that we could award it to someone without a state security. Most of the candidates we had, so what do I do when these are the candidates who are before me? I interview them and give the job to the best person, irrespective of if that is what you meant. If you meant something else, we probably have to have a discussion about what exactly it is that you meant. Then with regards to media, I'll tell you what the problem is. My regulations, attention December 2018, they were last amended in 2008. All those regulations that attention did in 2008. So again, this problem could easily be resolved by aligning the Act to the Constitution and then changing the regulations accordingly. I don't know whether I'm making myself clear. My regulations, they are very old, so we were hamstrung. We couldn't deal with social media because in 2008, social media, so I believe, it is my sincere belief that our starting point should be alignment. Kanata align to zona
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Judge. I think we have run out of time, unfortunately. We've actually eaten about 27 minutes into our time. Let me, at this juncture, if honorable members allow, I know there are many questions. I think we can further engage the judge on different forums. I'm sure she can give us an email address or ZEC address where we can communicate and pose further questions. But we've identified the problem. I think the elephant in the house is Honorable David would like to